the front end of this. And of course, it's complex because we're working on all of these policies at the same time. And then also it's gotten a bit contentious. And I knew that that would happen when I've talked about these things. There's a reason Commissioner Sugars heard me say these things more than one occasion, because for 4 or 5 years, my real focus was trying to develop an overall strategy. And then when I was, certain for myself that it had been rigorously reviewed, then try to start implementing it. We have a start of our aggregation process. Chris Villarreal, RAP, who else was involved? We had a series of workshops where we developed 2 alternative rule sets on data access. One basically developed by Chris, the others an alternative. At some point, I hope in the near future, we'll flop that out. Part of the utility strategy seems to be to fight everything and delay everything. Our biggest challenge right now is just bandwidth in terms of our general staff at the commission and our advisory staff, and that seems to be, in my view, part of the strategy. But if you want entrepreneurs to play, they got to see this stuff. If you want a technology transition, or you think we're in technology transition, that is fraught with risk, because one model is to have me and the utilities decide what the technology winners are. And even though I have some degree of confidence in my ability, that isn't the optimal solution. Markets work like elections and jury trials because of group. It's group wisdom, not individual wisdom. And when you have people from all over the place trying different things and testing demand, we don't know what the customers want. Henry Ford once said, if I'd have given the customer what they wanted, I would have given them faster horses. The most famous entrepreneurs are the ones that find demand that nobody thought was there. I remember watching a business show questioning why Apple went into the phone business. The phone business, the analyst said, had been commoditized. They were cheap. Why would anybody? But the entrepreneur has a different view. You need them to drive technology transition. They won't play without the data. I hope that I circled around your question a little bit. I hope I also answered it.
Right, sure. No, that's great. And then, focusing on, your core responsibility, what is it that state utility regulators can do to better enable access to customer energy usage data, as well as the grid data that is important for that interface between the distribution system and the transmission system operation?
And to me, oops, I think I'm bobbing like I always do. It's harder on a camera. I sway in person. It probably irritates
in the
people,
frame, we're good.
Yeah, I'll try to stay in the frame. I think you hit on the 2 main categories. One was, I see, would describe as visibility in the distribution system, which is the where. Where can I put the stuff? Where can it be interconnected at the minimal cost? Then the other would be more the usage data, which to me is very important in determining what are the business opportunities. And the things you can do with this kind of information that immediately pop to mind. I mean, you can figure out which house has the biggest difference in its peak usage. You can get very good at measuring efficiency. You can target efficiency programs. The hourly use data can give you insights on any type of time of use. All of those things, to me, you have the individual data from an individual customer, which you need to market to the individual. You have the anonymized data of the whole system, which is to look for business opportunities. And then you have the visibility into the distribution system, which where do you put it for stuff with particular interconnections. And you can bunch all of this stuff together, when you're looking at efficiency or demand response, which might or might not have interconnections. And then you have something like storage, which can really be multiple things at multiple times. I would put them all in one blob. You can get hung up on a definition of what is a DER, But to me, it's all that new stuff that you want to work together, you want it to compete, you want it to challenge each other, and you want it to be compensated on a apples to apples basis. But all of those things, I think. I hope I didn't amble too far from your question.
Well, just let's get back to some specific actions. So I recognize, you've held some workshops in your state, you've teed up the issues, you've got, two potential versions of rules that you haven't yet disposed of. And so when you think about, the roles with respect to utility regulators, there's the role of the entrepreneurs, the companies, the markets. You've got your customers. You've got the regulators. You've got this state policy that could be set by your legislature. Where do you think the sweet spot is for the direction that needs to come from the Public Service Commission?
To me, the threshold question in all of this is the nature of monopoly, which is something that's divided between the legislative side and the commission side. Who do you want to be a market participant? If you're limited to the utility only, then a lot of these data questions are for the commission, the commission's analysis, commission accountability with utility programs. If you want a third-party model, then to me, the regulator needs to drive that in two principal directions. One is the hosting capacity, putting that out there. And we also have an interconnection working group. And that the hosting capacity is kind of, it's in more than one place like so much of this stuff. And then the other, if you have AMI, the AMI data on usage, both anonymized and the individual. If we want to try, I'm sure a privacy question will come up, so I won't fall off into that right now. But to me, the regulator, the initial thing is who's going to be a market participant, which goes to the nature of your model. I don't suppose there is a completely vertically integrated, and there's, even Illinois, the restructured state like Illinois, has the regulated monopoly at the wires level. But to me, answering those kinds of questions, who's going to participate, is the driving question of what you need to do with respect to data issues.
All right. We want to invite questions from the audience, either just break in live here on the computer, your computer audio. I do have some questions in the chat box, so can we get to those? Let's start with a question here about how much are the data issues common for all states, we'll say all states within the MISO footprint at least, common for all states versus individual states or customized for utilities. And there's a comment here, it seems like each state can get bogged down in solving very difficult issues themselves, and there's a lot of learning that can happen across states. So are these issues more or less common across states in the MISO footprint, or are some of them really unique? And is that a reasonable approach to, just sort of suffer on your own for all of these things?
I think a lot of the issues are in common. Of course, the policy specifics will differ, mostly depending on what you see as the role of the third parties. And like with OMS, I mean, a lot of my views on this have been shaped with numerous conversations, including with Iquam and Tricia at OMS meetings. I mean, just talking through all of this stuff is one of the real values of OMS, even though we have our OMS stuff where we're a stakeholder in the MISO process, talking about state policy. There's a whole lot of that there, and there's a whole lot of really capable and well-informed individuals, and talking through these issues has been a great value to me in terms of developing or working on developing the policies. But I think generally that there are issues in common. I know there's specific stuff that will be different. But for the most part, I think there are issues in common, and they're part of a broader questions that are being raised about the nature of big technology and all of that stuff that are large social questions, not just limited to our utility world or electric energy world.
Right. I mean, you've had a very active DER work group for quite a while within OMS, so I think there's a lot of that peer sharing
Yeah, and there's a
going.
lot of expertise. We've had presentations. We've had access to leading national experts, and then the expertise at the staff level and the commissions. I mean, it's been very instrumental, along with groups like RAP, and then the NARUC-NASIO thing on distribution planning. Um, there's a lot of these kinds of efforts, a lot of people thinking about these things. Another thing that's different to me, that's potentially a fork in the road, is you'd go scale. What role does scale play? If you look at California, they're so focused on rooftop, which is a whole different. You don't know where your generation is going to show up, which makes it very challenging to plan the other aspects of the system. And of course, they have population density, they have high land values. Of course, in my state, we don't have population density, we have lower land values. And it looks like our model is going to be more scaled. We want the third parties out there, but it might be remote in a field somewhere. We don't have land use issues. I know in Minnesota, there's a thing about preservation of farmland. I've talked to folks in Virginia where they have these battlefield monuments. Those growth problems are good to have. It's our problems is we have counties that have lost population for 10 straight decades with some of the worst poverty in the country, but they have low land values and higher radiation, which is the perfect mix for scaled solar. So there's always going to be state differences, but to me, the broader questions are more common. But the
Great.
scale thing is also an important issue. What's your model on scale? If you're in Manhattan, you're stuck with one model. High population density, obviously, where we're at, it's different, and your distribution planning and all of that kind of stuff is a lot different depending on which model develops.
We did, you mentioned earlier data privacy. We have a question here about that from NARUC, actually. They had a question last week from a utility asking whether NARUC had any guidance for commissioners with respect to granularity of grid data, feeders, substations, in terms of what should be released publicly and versus, viewable by others in a proceeding through a non-disclosure agreement. So this is a huge area, not just for companies, but just generally the data privacy issues. What are some of the issues that you have teed up, at least in Arkansas? Which ones do you view, just on a personal level, based on what you've seen, are really the key?
Me, the privacy issue from the consumer perspective is really a value issue. I think there's a lot more reservation about people profiting from your information than there is about people using their information in ways they find value. And when you look at the cell phone, is a mobile tracking and listening device that everybody loves, even though they don't like to be listened to or tracked. The other values, in my view, offset. That's why I have mine sitting right here. When you look at Amazon.com and you're giving up privacy when you take that convenience, and you know that you made that decision, and you might not like everything about it, but you still find value there and go forward. So to me, making sure the debate changes when it's, should somebody be peeping into my window? Are there ways that my life can be better by using this information in commerce? And you have to frame the debate, in my view, that way. And then you have to have the option. There are some folks that don't want the Amazon.com experience in energy. They want to get a bill, they want to pay it, and they want to complain, and that's pretty much the end of the transaction. But different customers have different preferences. And to me, what you're trying to do is deliver the ones that want that experience while protecting the other ones. And that's the whole consent issue. But then these issues can be wielded as sticks. Everybody knows there's privacy issues, there's big data issues, the big tech stuff, whether it's Google, Facebook, and these issues are percolating out there. So they can be used as sticks for those that want to oppose policies by making it difficult. The data doesn't do you any good if it's not in a usable format. If there's not a limited number of clicks, if there's 6 or 8 clicks to get from your data and put it in the hands of the third party, each click you lose people. If you're going to get the benefits of a market, it has to be easy. It has to be easy to do. The data needs to be in a standard format. It needs to be electronic, and it needs to be presented to the third party in mass in a usable form and quickly. And so for those whose economic interests are not in doing that, the privacy thing is a huge stick to hit people with. If you want the Amazon.com experience in energy, it needs to be easy. If you don't want that, if you don't see benefit there, then nobody should have access to your information. That's the one thing I think is a potential red herring, and my lawyer friends I sometimes find rat holes to fall into. There's the notion of who owns the data. I think that's an overly simplified way to look at it that takes you to a bad place, because who owns the data is a binary question. Okay, if I own my data, and the reflex reaction is, well, the customer owns the data. Well, if I own my data, can the utility use my data and add it with everybody else's data that they also own to do a load forecast like they've done since the inception of the industry? Or do they have to buy everybody's data back from them to do this load forecast? I mean, you can fall in, when you start with a legal proposition, you can fall into a policy rat hole that, to me, the usage, consent, those are the real issues. If you try to reduce it to an ownership thing, I think you get to a screwball place pretty quickly.
Thanks for that response. And a lot of that focused on really the kind of a customer energy usage data perspective. We turn to a grid data perspective where we're talking, say, about hosting capacity analysis. I know there have been battles in New York and California, just 2 examples about what should be public versus really having these pretty big buffer zones, so that it's maybe not as useful. So what are some of the issues that you've teed up in Arkansas, and how are you thinking about the granularity with which data should be disclosed to be useful and also maintain security of the grid?
Yeah, to me, there is a legitimate security question, but again, this can be used as a stick. And this will be a little bit sarcastic and a little bit humorous. But there's nobody sitting in Guantanamo Bay. You think of the 2 guys in there. What are you in here for? Well, I killed a dozen kids at the mall, and the other guy says, "Well, I've caused 8 NERC violations." That's not what their target is. They're not targeting distribution systems. They want to do a mass thing. And we have some places that have done these things, and what we have not seen is an uptick in attacks on the infrastructure in those systems. You have to be reasonable. You don't want to lay out a roadmap of what somebody has to tear up to create a mass event. But at the same time, that seems like a red herring. We haven't seen those kinds of attacks. We don't have terrorists sitting around plotting what to do, little bitty things that tornadoes do all by themselves. And I don't mean to be cavalier on the security issues, but the folks that sometimes make those arguments the most voraciously are the ones that have economic interest in the outcome of the debate. We need to have common sense and protect our critical infrastructure, but we don't want that to become a barrier enacted to keep third parties from succeeding in what is traditionally a monopoly business. And the resistance on that level is substantial and fierce. At least it is in our state. And I imagine it's that way everywhere. When you talk about these things in concept, they nod and grin rather than giving you policy reasons why it's wrong. And then when you try to do it, they litigate and snarl. So
Great.
we're in the litigation and snarling process right now. So, but we're going to bull through it. So.
So I know I want to give an opportunity for anyone who wants to ask a question live here to unmute. Trisha? She's working on it.
Yep, there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I wanted to go back to, Ted, you're saying something about customer data and essentially using the data as fixed. I think you're hitting on something that I'm dealing with right now, but what's the commission's role in ensuring that customers are providing like an informed consent for release of their data? Because I think we've moved away from this historic construct of like personally identifiable information, because that's not necessarily what the data is anymore. It's the insights that the utilities are gathering from your load patterns. And so I think the industry and the data world has leapfrogged well above where stakeholders and even commissioners are in data privacy. And now we're catching up on this whole consent when it's insights, not actual tangible data. So what's the role of the commission in protecting and being out ahead of that data? Because I'm going to add one more thing. Because you were mentioning Google and Facebook, I give up that data, whether it's cavalier on my end as I click through the privacy screens, I chose to do that. But I think implicit in a lot of commission decisions is giving up that data, whether people know it or not.
The starting point to that is to me, there's kind of two sets of data that are different. One would be the individual usage of the customer, which is really tied to their desire that it be used in the hands of third parties to give them stuff that they want. The other is the bigger picture where it's anonymized, and there are a number of standards out there for the correct anonymization that we're looking at. But to me, you start with dividing those into two things. And to me, the restriction should be more on the individual privacy thing, particularly if in the large group you can't figure out any customers. And we have a couple of steel mills who are among the largest users anywhere. And if so, you have to have a way that you can't figure those out. You have to have a way that where businesses can't use it to figure out what their competitors are doing. But to me, that large data properly anonymized, there's a lot of value there that we won't even know what that is. If you can put that in the hands of institutions of higher education, you can use that to support DOE grants. There's so many uses. And to me, some of the really most exciting things about data is we have concepts that we know you can use it for. What are people going to be able to figure out that we haven't thought of that's innovative? To me, there's a lot of possibility in that, in what I call the big data, where it's anonymized. But if you're going to sell it to individuals, you need to have their consent, and the green button kind of stuff really really settles that issue in my mind. Now there's where you have barriers. It's got to be easy, and it's got to be quick, and it's got to be useful to the third party. So you need a standardized format. And that's where, and to me, the commission role in all that is to set up those rules, particularly in the context of AMI. When you approve AMI, and that's one observation I would make that I think is very important. If you don't have AMI, what you need to do in the process when they ask for it, raise these issues then. Because if they have a $400 million request for AMI pending, and you ask them a question, the answer you're going to get is yes. If your AMI is already installed and you ask them a question, you have no leverage, and the answer is going to be no. I understand that that's an oversimplification, but I think it stands. Try to think about these policies in the context of an AMI request, where the utility is asking for something, and then they will work with you to help overcome obstacles rather than work against you once they've already got the large capital investment.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions that folks want to answer or ask live? Otherwise, I've got some more questions here.
Can I add one more?
Sure, of course.
So I think the second part to this is what level of right do I as a customer have to my data? And so I'm struggling with some things before me where it appears in the way in which you can set up AMI or the ways that you can set up these data interfaces with the utility. Just by the technology limitations, they can potentially limit the access I have to my own data versus the utility access to my data. And so is there, I think I'm looking at this, we have essentially what I call an AMI 2.0 proposal before us, and it's not just AMI anymore. It's way more complex, and it involves App Store. So I think I'm just looking, what's your threshold for like what accesses to my own data? All the data the utility has on me?
I would start from the other end of that. Who wants the data and why? Now, the few of us on the screen would want to look at our own load shapes, but how many know what a load shape is? To me, making the critical question is making the data useful for the third party. And the reason people want their data, if they're not just looking at their own load shape, is to enable them to participate in some program. And you need standardization, whatever they need, in a standardized format where it's simple and uniform. And you can't send people a PDF or here's everything, and then then that individual mails their PDF to the third party. Nobody's going to do business in that world. So to me, trying to get to the purpose of the use at the back end, which is some third party being able to use it broad enough where it encompasses as many categories as you can get in there. I mean, what, the MISO market roadmap, is it, as I hope, is it going to have a real-time market for ancillary services? What data you need for that? I mean, to me, start with the usage and work back. Why are they going to push that button? Why do they want their information? Probably to participate in some business thing that they've heard of. So go to that end and try to build back towards it. I hope that was helpful.
Let's try to squeeze one more question if we could, Dominic, if that's all right. We've got a question from Ann Kim. Do you want to put yourself on camera here and ask the question? Or at least unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks so much for the opportunity, Lisa and Ted. It's been fun, listening to everything from Thanksgiving dinner down to, different levels of, necessary or perhaps unnecessary concerns around personal data security. So I have a question. How many MISO states have created regulations around data security for distributed energy resources behind the meter and in front of the meter? And what trends do you see there for creating more resilient communities as more natural disasters happen?
I know that we're looking at it. I know that Minnesota's looking at it. I know that Wisconsin's beginning to look at it. I know that Texas, with its ERCOT tradition, even the out-of-state folks, there's some expectation as part of AMI that data will be out there. I know everybody's kind of looking at it. I don't think that then, well, one of our rules proposals is modeled after Illinois, who I think is probably further along. And their consumer advocate, whose name I should be able to recall, has an outstanding presentation on what you can do. I mean, they're breaking down usage by income and questioning some assumptions on rate design. I mean, there's so many things you can do with this stuff. But everybody, it's early everywhere, as far as I can tell. I don't know that anybody has it deployed and operating, and everybody's looking at these DER things, and it's early. And that's now your second part.
I think we're
the resilience stuff. Okay, do we need to cut off?
Dominic, do we need to go back to the homeland here?
Yeah, if we could, I can give you, like another 30 seconds. But yeah, I'll start having everyone come back in the main session.
All
What
right,
I would say about anything reliability or resilience, that's the strong link in the chain. The notion to me that the policymakers are going to move so fast that our engineers can't keep the system running is borderline comical. the real problem is it's not getting the policy right. Our engineers are really good. The system will work fine, not easily because they're really good and it will be hard work. But I see that as the strength of our system, reliability issues, because our engineers are just that good.
Thank you so
Great
much.
answer.
for
Thank
your
you so much.
comments. Thank you for everyone's questions. We could talk to Chair Thomas all day on probably any subject, and we would learn a lot. Very insightful comments as always. Thanks, and I think we're going back